I stood under the glittering multi-million-dollar crystal chandelier of the Lumiere Tower's grand ballroom, nursing a lukewarm club soda while the billionaire CEO of Vance Global pointed a microphone directly at my face. The room, packed with 300 of the city's most elite corporate climbers, erupted into a chorus of polite, mocking laughter. It was a sound that crawled under my skin and vibrated in my teeth. I looked around the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns, and my eyes locked onto my own parents. They were laughing the hardest, their faces flushed with secondhand superiority, completely untroubled by the fact that their eldest son was being publicly executed on a stage. Beside the CEO stood my wife Elena. She didn't look angry. She didn't look embarrassed for me. She simply looked down at her strappy designer heels, a soft, complicit smile playing on her lips, making absolutely no effort to defend the man she had been married to for 7 years. It was the ultimate soul-crushing betrayal, the grand finale of a lifetime spent being treated like a doormat. But as the cruel laughter echoed off the imported marble walls, I didn't break down. I didn't turn and run out of the double doors like they all expected me to. I just smiled, feeling the crisp, heavy parchment of a legally binding document resting quietly in the breast pocket of my inexpensive suit. It was the master deed to the very building we were all standing in, and in a matter of minutes, every single person in that room was going to learn exactly who they were laughing at. To truly understand how I ended up being publicly humiliated by my wife's boss while my own family cheered him on, you have to understand the toxic dynamic I was born into. For as long as I can remember, I was the invisible son in my family's household. My younger brother, Julian, was the undisputed center of the universe. Julian was handsome, charismatic, loud, and completely, utterly incapable of lifting a single finger to help himself. I was the family workhorse. The dynamic was established early and enforced brutally. When Julian graduated high school with a dismal C average, my parents threw him a massive party and bought him a brand new sports car because he needed a reliable vehicle for his bright future. When I graduated 2 years prior with honors, I was handed a set of cheap luggage and a handwritten invoice from my father for the rent I would now owe if I wanted to keep sleeping in my childhood bedroom. Their philosophy was sickeningly simple. Mark is resilient and tough, so he can handle the struggle of the real world. Julian is a sensitive, creative soul, so he needs to be shielded, protected, and heavily funded. That exact philosophy dictated the entire trajectory of my life. When I finally moved out, working 3 grueling jobs to pay my way through night school, I swore I would build a life where I never had to beg for scraps of affection or basic respect. That was around the time I met Elena. Back then, Elena was a struggling administrative assistant at a logistics firm. She was sweet, fiercely grounded, and seemingly just as determined to make something of herself as I was. We bonded over our shared ambition, our late-night diner dates splitting a single plate of fries, and our whispered dreams of building a quiet, secure life together. For the first few years of our marriage, we were genuinely happy. But while Elena sought traditional corporate success, I took a different, much quieter path. I started a small, independent property management company. Because I worked out of our spare bedroom, wore paint-stained jeans and faded t-shirts most days, and never bragged about my finances, my family, and eventually my own wife, assumed I was a low-level handyman barely scraping by. What I never told them, mostly because they never cared enough to ask a single question about my days, was that I wasn't just fixing leaky faucets for landlords. I was the landlord. I was aggressively buying properties. I started with a dilapidated duplex, fixed it up with my own 2 hands, rented it out, and leveraged it to buy a 4-plex, then an apartment building, then a strip mall. Over the course of a decade, I systematically built a massive, quiet real estate empire under a completely anonymous corporate LLC. I was pulling in millions a year in passive income, carefully reinvesting every penny. My master plan was to surprise Elena with our immense wealth on our upcoming 10th anniversary. I wanted to buy her a sprawling dream home in the hills, hand her the keys, and tell her that neither of us would ever have to work another day in our lives unless we wanted to. But as the years passed, Elena began to change. The transformation was slow at first, then terrifyingly rapid. She had taken a mid-level management job at Vance Global, a massive corporate acquisition firm run by Marcus Vance, an arrogant, silver-spoon CEO who had inherited his father's empire and acted as though he had built it from dirt. As Elena climbed the corporate ladder under Marcus's mentorship, the sweet girl I married evaporated. She was replaced by a cold, status-obsessed stranger who cared only about designer labels, exclusive networking events, and the perceived power she held over others. She began actively complaining about my embarrassing lack of ambition. She would roll her eyes when I told her I had secured a new contract, coldly informing me that unclogging toilets and sweeping driveways wasn't a real career for a grown man. She started spending more time with her colleagues, and more specifically with Marcus. She would come home smelling of expensive restaurants and top-shelf liquor, brushing past me with barely a greeting. The real breaking point, the beginning of the end, happened just 2 weeks before the fateful party. Elena burst through our front door, her eyes gleaming with a frantic, manic energy. She announced that she had just been promoted to Vice President of Acquisitions. I was genuinely thrilled for her. I rushed forward, hugged her, told her how incredibly proud I was, and suggested we go to our favorite old Italian place to celebrate just the two of us. She immediately pulled away, a distinct look of distaste flashing across her perfectly contoured face. She informed me that Marcus was throwing a massive promotion gala in her honor at the Lumiere Tower, the most exclusive, high-security luxury high-rise venue in the entire city. It was to be a strict black-tie event, and she explicitly, coldly told me I needed to go buy a new suit so I wouldn't look like the hired help and embarrass her in front of her new corporate peers. The words stung, but I swallowed my pride, attributing her cruelty to the stress of the new position. The very next evening, my parents called an emergency family dinner at their house. Whenever my mother used that specific phrase, it universally meant that someone desperately needed a large sum of money, and that someone was always Julian. Elena and I arrived and sat around my parents' formal dining table. The cast of characters was all too familiar. Elena, glued to her phone, my mother pacing nervously, my father looking stern, and Julian, dressed in a Gucci shirt he absolutely couldn't afford, sighing dramatically as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. Without missing a beat, Julian launched into his latest sob story. He explained that his newest venture, a cryptocurrency trading firm that he ran out of his overpriced apartment, had completely collapsed. He was in deep financial trouble and needed immediate capital to pivot to a new tech idea. My father cleared his throat loudly, resting his hands on the table, and looked directly into my eyes. "Mark, your brother is in a slight bind. We need you to write him a check for $150,000. I actually laughed out loud, thinking it was a bizarre joke. I almost choked on my water. $150,000? Dad, are you out of your mind? I don't have that kind of cash just sitting in a shoebox to hand out. Don't you dare lie to us, Mark, my mother snapped instantly, her eyes narrowing into vicious slits. We aren't stupid. We know you have savings hidden away. You never go on vacations. You drive a 10-year-old truck, and you sit at home in sweatpants all day. You owe it to your brother. He has actual, tangible potential. He's going to be a major CEO someday, and he just needs a little runway. He's 30 years old, Mom, I said, trying desperately to keep my voice level and reasonable. He needs to get a job, a real job, not a handout to fund his delusions. Julian slammed his fist on the mahogany table, knocking over a salt shaker. I'm a visionary, Mark. I can't be chained to a cubicle desk doing mindless grunt work like you. You wouldn't possibly understand. You just fix drywall for cheap landlords. You have no concept of high-level business. I turned to look at Elena. I expected my wife, my partner, to step in, to defend our household, to tell them they were being insane. Instead, she slowly looked up from her phone, sighed, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum, and crossed her arms. Mark, honestly, just help him out. It's your family. Besides, if you're secretly hoarding some stash of money while I pay for all the nice things in our lives, it's pretty selfish of you not to share it. I'm the one bringing in the real paycheck now, so you should be supporting your brother. The betrayal in her words felt like a physical knife twisting in my gut. My own wife was feeding me to the wolves. I'm not giving him a single dime, I said firmly, pushing my chair back and standing up from the table. This conversation is over. My father's face turned a violent shade of purple. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. If you walk out that door, you are no son of mine. You will come to your wife's party on Friday, and you will bring a certified check for your brother. Or you can consider yourself permanently dead to this family. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out. The drive home with Elena was suffocatingly silent, the air thick with unspoken resentment. When we finally walked into our house, the argument exploded like a powder keg. She accused me of being pathologically jealous of Julian and bitterly resentful of her success. She yelled that I was holding her back, that I was a small-minded man with no ambition. In the middle of her screaming match, her phone, resting on the kitchen island, buzzed. The screen lit up brightly. It was a text message from Vance. I couldn't help but look down. The message read, "Don't let the dead weight ruin your night, babe. I'll make sure you're taken care of at the party. I've got a surprise for you. Miss you." My heart plummeted straight into my stomach, turning to ice. I pointed a shaking finger at the phone. "What the hell is that, Elena? Babe? Miss you?" She lunged forward and snatched the phone away, her face flushing crimson, but her eyes remained cold and defiant. "It's just how people in the corporate industry talk, Mark. Grow up and stop being so insecure. Marcus is a mentor to me. He actually believes in my potential, unlike you. He sees my value." I didn't sleep a single wink that night. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena and I lived like two hostile ghosts haunting the same house. She went out and bought a $3,000 gown for the gala, brazenly putting it on a joint credit card she naturally assumed I would pay off. She was constantly texting, smiling at her screen, and coming home late. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was quietly finalizing the biggest, most aggressive real estate deal of my entire life. My holding company had been in secret negotiations for 6 months to purchase a massive commercial property in the downtown financial district. The previous ownership group was highly motivated to liquidate, and I had the raw liquid capital to bypass the banks entirely. The ink dried on the final contracts exactly 24 hours before Elena's promotion party. The property I had just purchased in an all-cash 8-figure deal was none other than the Lumiere Tower. When the night of the party finally arrived, I stood in front of the mirror and put on a clean, tailored, but noticeably inexpensive suit. Elena barely glanced in my direction as we silently got into the sleek black town car that Marcus had sent specifically for her. When we pulled up to the Lumiere Tower, the sheer imposing scale of the building took my breath away. It was a sprawling marvel of modern glass and dark steel, dominating the city skyline. As we stepped out of the private elevator and into the grand ballroom on the penthouse floor, I was immediately abandoned. Elena gravitated straight toward the cluster of wealthy executives, leaving me completely alone to hover near the corner bar like a forgotten piece of luggage. About an hour into the opulent event, just as the jazz band took a break, my parents and Julian suddenly materialized out of the crowd, cornering me against the bar. My mother viciously shoved a thick legal folder directly into my chest. "What is this?" I asked, looking down at the dense stack of papers. "It's a home equity loan application," my father said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "We checked the county public records. You own your little house outright. We filled out all the necessary paperwork for you. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line, and the bank will wire $150,000 directly to Julian's business account by Monday." I stared at the three of them in absolute horrifying disbelief. "You want me to put a massive legal lien on my home, the roof over my head, to fund Julian's imaginary tech company?" "It's not imaginary, you idiot," Julian hissed, looking around nervously to ensure none of the wealthy guests were watching his outburst. "And if you don't sign it right now, Dad is going to make a massive scene right here. You wouldn't want to ruin Elena's big night by being a selfish prick, would you?" I looked at my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, protect me, and support me. They were looking at me not as a human being, not as a son or a brother, but as an obstacle, a fleshy bank account to be bullied and exploited. And then, I saw Elena walking briskly over. I thought for one fleeting, desperate second that she would see her in-laws cornering me and finally put a stop to this madness. Elena stopped, looked at the papers in my hand, and then looked at me with eyes as cold as a winter lake. Mark, for God's sake, just sign the stupid papers. Marcus is about to give his keynote speech, and I do not want any of your pathetic family drama ruining my evening. You can pay the loan off over time. It's not that big of a deal. Not that big of a deal? I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it scared me. You want me to risk the home we live in? It's your home, Mark, she said, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. I'm moving into a luxury penthouse suite downtown on Monday. Marcus thought it would be much better for my commute, and he secured it for me. I was going to wait until tomorrow to tell you, but since you're being so incredibly stubborn and embarrassing, I think we're done. I want a divorce. The entire world seemed to stop spinning. The music faded into a dull roar. My wife of 7 years was leaving me, moving into a luxury apartment funded by her billionaire boss, and casually telling me to leverage my only visible asset to pay off my spoiled brother's debts, all in the same breath. Before my brain could even begin to process the sheer, concentrated evil of her words, a loud, obnoxious tapping echoed through the massive ballroom. Marcus Vance was standing center stage, tapping a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute. He was a tall, excessively tanned man with perfectly styled hair who looked like he had never been told the word no in his entire pampered life. The room quieted down immediately, all eyes turning to the billionaire. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice booming smoothly over the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the brilliant future of Vance Global. And the brightest part of that future is standing right here. He gestured grandly to Elena, who practically floated up the stairs onto the stage, standing right beside him. The crowd erupted into applause. I watched as my parents actually beamed with pride, clapping enthusiastically as if Elena were their own flesh and blood, entirely ignoring the fact that their son's marriage had just been brutally ended 2 minutes prior. Elena is brilliant, fiercely driven, and wonderfully unburdened by mediocrity, Marcus continued, placing a highly inappropriate, intimate hand flat on the small of her back. It's a very rare thing to find someone who can rise so high above their unfortunate circumstances, especially when those circumstances are less than inspiring. He paused dramatically. The room hung on his every word. His eyes lazily scanned the crowd until they locked directly onto me, standing near the bar. A cruel, predatory smirk spread slowly across his face. You see, in the high-stakes corporate world, we have a very specific technical term for assets that produce absolutely zero value while dragging down the portfolio. We call them dead weight. And sometimes, if you want to truly soar to the top, you have to find the courage to cut that dead weight loose. He leaned heavily into the microphone, his voice dripping with venom. Isn't that right, Mark? The entire ballroom turned in unison to look at me. 300 pairs of wealthy, judging, mocking eyes. The silence was broken by a scattering of laughter. My mother actually covered her mouth to hide a vicious giggle. Julian openly sneered, shaking his head. And Elena? Elena looked down at her shoes, completely complicit in my public execution, a small smile on her face. I've heard quite a lot about you, Mark, Marcus said, his tone mocking and loud. Fixing drywall, unclogging toilets, playing handyman while holding back a spectacular woman who was always meant for the penthouse. I think it's time you finally step aside and let the adults handle the real business. In fact, security? 2 massive men in sharp black suits immediately stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the stage. I think Mark has had enough free tap water for one evening, Marcus announced to the roaring amusement of the crowd. Please escort our freelance friend to the service elevator in the back. He frankly doesn't belong in a building like this, and he's ruining the aesthetic. The laughter swelled. It was a low, rumbling, physical sound of collective amusement at my utter expense. My father leaned in close to my ear and whispered harshly, "Sign the damn papers before you get thrown out onto the street like the trash you are." The 2 security guards approached me rapidly, their faces stern and uncompromising. "Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately," the larger one said, reaching out a massive hand to grab my shoulder. I didn't move an inch. I didn't flinch. I didn't sweat. And I didn't look away. I simply reached slowly into the breast pocket of my suit, my fingers brushing against the heavy, folded legal document. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. My voice wasn't a shout, but it carried a strange, heavy authority that made the security guard hesitate, his hand stopping inches from my jacket. Marcus laughed sharply into the microphone. "Oh, we have a tough guy," I said. "Throw the plumber out." Before the guards could make another move, the heavy mahogany double doors at the far back of the ballroom violently burst open. A breathless, frantic-looking older man in a sharp gray suit practically sprinted into the room. He was sweating profusely, a small entourage of building officials trailing frantically behind him. It was Mr. Sterling, the senior executive property manager of the Lumiere Tower. Sterling pushed his way ruthlessly through the crowd of billionaires and executives, ignoring their indignant gasps. Marcus looked visibly annoyed from the stage. "Sterling? What on earth is the meaning of this interruption? I rented this entire floor for a private corporate event." Sterling completely ignored the billionaire CEO. His panic eyes darted wildly around the massive room until they finally found me standing near the bar, flanked by the security guards. All the remaining color completely drained from Sterling's face. He rushed over to me, aggressively shoving one of the massive security guards out of his way. "Mr. Evans," Sterling gasped, bending at the waist in a deep, highly respectful bow. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry. I was just informed by the downstairs front desk that you had entered the building. I had absolutely no idea you were attending this tenant's event. If I had known you were coming, I would have had the owner's VIP suite fully prepared and catered for you immediately." The entire ballroom plunged into a dead, suffocating, absolute silence. You could have heard a single pin drop on the marble floor. Marcus Vance furrowed his brow, stepping aggressively to the very edge of the stage. "Sterling, have you completely lost your mind? Why in God's name are you apologizing to this broke handyman? I told you to have him thrown out of my party." Sterling slowly stood up straight and turned to face Marcus. His expression shifted instantly from frantic panic to absolute unbridled horror. "Mr. Vance, I strongly advise you to watch your tone." "Watch my tone?" Marcus scoffed, his face turning red with rage. "I pay over $3 million a year to lease 4 floors of this building. I am Vance Global. I am your biggest tenant." Sterling swallowed hard, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. He turned slightly back to face the massive crowd, projecting his voice so every single person in the silent room could hear him. "Mr. Vance, as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, the corporate ownership group that previously held the Lumiere Tower liquidated all of their assets. The building was purchased in a private, expedited, all-cash transaction." Sterling turned slowly toward me, extending a shaking hand respectfully in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce the sole proprietor of the new holding company and the absolute owner of Lumiere Tower, Mr. Mark Evans." The reaction in the room was instantaneous and violently chaotic. Loud gasps rippled through the elite crowd like a shockwave. My mother literally dropped her expensive clutch. The sharp sound of the metal clasp hitting the marble floor rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. Julian's jaw practically unhinged, his eyes bulging out of his head. Elena stumbled backward on the stage as if she had been physically struck, her hand flying to cover her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between me and Sterling as if she were desperately trying to wake up from a horrific nightmare. Marcus's arrogant, predatory smirk melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion and panic. That's legally impossible. He's a nobody. He fixes toilets. He's broke." I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the document. I unfolded the certified notarized master deed of sale and handed it calmly to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, would you mind verifying this document for the room?" Sterling barely glanced at the heavy seal before nodding vigorously, holding it up. "It is entirely authentic, sir. Mr. Evans's private LLC wired the full purchase amount yesterday morning. He owns every single brick, every window, and every square foot of this entire property." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the stage. The massive crowd of executives parted from me like the Red Sea, backing away in awe and fear. I walked to the base of the stage and looked up at Marcus, who was now sweating profusely under the bright stage lights. his confident posture entirely shattered. "You were right about one thing tonight, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, projecting clearly across the silent room without the need for a microphone. "In the high-stakes corporate world, you absolutely have to cut the dead weight loose, and as the new owner of this building, I made it my personal business to meticulously review all current tenant contracts this afternoon." Marcus swallowed audibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Your corporate lease for the 4 floors of Vance Global officially expired at midnight last night," I continued, savoring the absolute terror in his eyes. "You were operating on a temporary month-to-month grace period while aggressively trying to negotiate a lower rate with the previous owners. But I don't negotiate with dead weight. I am officially publicly terminating your tenancy. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my building before I have your assets seized." "Mr. Evans," Sterling gasped, bending at the waist in a deep, highly respectful bow. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry. I was just informed by the downstairs front desk that you had entered the building. I had absolutely no idea you were attending this tenant's event. If I had known you were coming, I would have had the owner's VIP suite fully prepared and catered for you immediately." The entire ballroom plunged into a dead, suffocating, absolute silence. You could have heard a single pin drop on the marble floor. Marcus Vance furrowed his brow, stepping aggressively to the very edge of the stage. "Sterling, have you completely lost your mind? Why in God's name are you apologizing to this broke handyman? I told you to have him thrown out of my party." Sterling slowly stood up straight and turned to face Marcus. His expression shifted instantly from frantic panic to absolute, unbridled horror. "Mr. Vance, I strongly advise you to watch your tone." "Watch my tone?" Marcus scoffed, his face turning red with rage. "I pay over $3 million a year to lease 4 floors of this building. I am Vance Global. I am your biggest tenant." Sterling swallowed hard, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. He turned slightly back to face the massive crowd, projecting his voice so every single person in the silent room could hear him. "Mr. Vance, as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, the corporate ownership group that previously held the Lumiere Tower liquidated all of their assets. The building was purchased in a private, expedited, all-cash transaction." Sterling turned slowly toward me, extending a shaking hand respectfully in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce the sole proprietor of the new holding company and the absolute owner of the Lumiere Tower, Mr. Mark Evans." The reaction in the room was instantaneous and violently chaotic. Loud gasps rippled through the elite crowd like a shockwave. My mother literally dropped her expensive clutch. The sharp sound of the metal clasp hitting the marble floor rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. Julian's jaw practically unhinged, his eyes bulging out of his head. Elena stumbled backward on the stage as if she had been physically struck, her hand flying to cover her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between me and Sterling as if she were desperately trying to wake up from a horrific nightmare. Marcus's arrogant, predatory smirk melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion and panic. That's legally impossible. He's a nobody. He fixes toilets. He's broke." I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the document. I unfolded the certified notarized master deed of sale and handed it calmly to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, would you mind verifying this document for the room?" Sterling barely glanced at the heavy seal before nodding vigorously, holding it up. "It is entirely authentic, sir. Mr. Evans' private LLC wired the full purchase amount yesterday morning. He owns every single brick, every window, and every square foot of this entire property." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the stage. The massive crowd of executives parted from me like the Red Sea, backing away in awe and fear. I walked to the base of the stage and looked up at Marcus, who was now sweating profusely under the bright stage lights, his confident posture entirely shattered. "You were right about one thing tonight, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, projecting clearly across the silent room without the need for a microphone. "In the high-stakes corporate world, you absolutely have to cut the dead weight loose. And as the new owner of this building, I made it my personal business to meticulously review all current tenant contracts this afternoon." Marcus swallowed audibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. Your corporate lease for the 4 floors of Vance Global officially expired at midnight last night, I continued, savoring the absolute terror in his eyes. You were operating on a temporary month-to-month grace period while aggressively trying to negotiate a lower rate with the previous owners. But I don't negotiate with dead weight. I am officially publicly terminating your tenancy. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my building before I have your assets seized. Mark, please, my mother whimpered, actual genuine tears of regret spilling down her cheeks. We're your family. We love you. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. You're just people I used to know. I calmly took the thick home equity loan papers from my father's trembling hands. I ripped them in half, then in quarters, and let the shredded pieces fall like dirty snow onto the pristine marble floor. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my house. If any of you ever approach me again, I will have my security team arrest you for trespassing, I stated with absolute terrifying finality. Without waiting for their pathetic apologies or responses, I turned my back on them, my sobbing ex-wife, and the entire room of stunned corporate elites. I walked purposefully out of the grand ballroom, the heavy mahogany double doors shutting firmly behind me with a satisfying thud. As I stepped into the private, glass-walled owner's elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, I felt a massive, invisible weight physically lift off my shoulders. I stepped out of Lumiere Tower and out into the cool, refreshing night air of the city. The streetlights sparkled around me, the city feeling alive and full of endless, beautiful possibilities. I had walked into that building as an underestimated, mocked outcast. I walked out as a free man, a king of my own making, ready to build an empire entirely on my own terms. And for the very first time in my life, as I looked up at the towering glass monolith I now owned, I knew exactly what I was worth.